correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, what's up? Welcome back to Me and Steve RPGs. Yeah, Me and Steve RPGs. Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I know the name of my own show. This is a good way to start it. And, well, I'm only one Steve tonight because the other Steve is off fishing with his father, so I hope he has a good time, catches fish, and, well, in the case of what they're fishing for, I hope the weather turns crappy so they actually can catch some. They're fishing for steelhead up in Lake Erie.
Oh, okay.
And steelhead do not like bright, sunny, warm fall weather.
Okay, that'll do it.
So, in any case, to help me do a podcast this week, I have enlisted the help of the voice you have heard, that being GM Phil.
Hello, Gamer Nation. How is everybody? And Steve, how are you?
I am doing pretty good. And before we get into too much else, our D20 Network spotlight this week is, of course, the Order 66, of which Phil is one of the hosts.
Yes, correct. We haven't had too many episodes lately. It's been a heck of a year. And, also, I mean, there's a lot of material out there, certainly for us to cover. But it's also very difficult to sometimes find the momentum and find the energy when the line itself, the Star Wars role-playing game, it's not dead. It's, in fact, from what we've heard, the books that Edge Studios reprinted are finally starting to hit stores. So that's a good sign.
They've started to hit, I think, in the UK. We haven't seen too many of them over on this side yet, but because I've been on the lookout for a few myself, and
still a good sign. Hopefully, maybe Chris and I will be able to get back to recording more regular episodes in the new year. We certainly have a lot to talk about as far as Star Wars goes. We've had Tales of the Jedi, we've had Andor.
Did you guys talk about Bad Batch much?
No, I don't think we did, because Bad Batch was early this year, wasn't it?
Might have been. I know season 2 was originally supposed to be out now,
and
then they bumped it back.
Yeah. So, I don't think haven't had much of a chance to talk about Bad Batch. But yeah, there's a lot of Star Wars out there. So, and a lot of it to dive and delve into still, as far as like classes and topics, and we'll get back to it. It's just, it's been a weird few years.
Well, and like you said, it is a thing where, because of the shakeup with the publishing and everything, yeah, it's a little hard to, people, like, I know, I was late coming to it, and I've really just kind of started building my collection, and now it's threatening to fall over on me. But I also finally got to play it for the first time, a little over a month ago.
It's a hell of a system.
Oh, it is. And I played Genesis,
No, of course.
And yes, it's more or less the same system.
Yeah.
But there's something about playing in the Star Wars universe that's just too much fun.
Oh, no doubt. Actually, that's one of the reasons why I'm digging Andor so much, is that I thought Solo was a great example of a like Edge of the Empire campaign. Had like a nice, well-balanced PC party. It had heist, it had hijinks, it had threat, drama. But like, that's a good 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 shot. Andor, that is how you run an Edge of the Empire campaign. Or like even like because of what it is, it's a fledgling rebellion campaign. It is fascinating to see that side of civilian life under the growing empire, and just like, oh no, you guys are definitely fascists. It is not just like Tarkin and Vader and the Emperor. No, it's all the way down the pipeline, baby. Wow.
Yeah. Well, let's see, Mike, the campaign I just started running is set, I'm calling it roughly 2 to 3 years BBY. I'm thinking it right about between season 2 and season 3 of Rebels is where we're starting, which is, I think, kind of, if you will, almost at the zenith of the Empire's power, probably.
Yeah, sweet spot. Real sweet spot.
But also there's, and this will tie into our topic for the night,
Sure.
But there's also, while there's a decent amount of background canon there,
Mhm.
there's not a lot of actual. I'm not a big EU person. I haven't had time to digest it all.
If you weren't in there from the beginning, it's a lot to try to digest. My gods.
But like there's enough there, and I've told my players, like, look, we're using canon as a loose guideline.
Sure.
Think of canon as maybe some of the legends, stories that you hear in universe. So it may or may not be exactly that way.
Absolutely.
One, for me, that takes a little stress off of me going, I have to make things exactly fit. And if I want something somewhere else, then I just put it there and, well, you heard wrong.
Sure. Sure.
So yeah, Order 66, great show. I'd never listen other
I don't
than.
recommend it.
Do you have any? How did that joke start?
Oh man, it goes back to like Saga Edition Order 66, like way back in the day, where some of their earliest bumpers were like Chris knows that story. Basically, it boiled down to, like someone's like laughingly, "Oh, no one listens to the Order 66 podcast." And it would, it was something along those lines. But man, we're talking like gods, like 9-10 years ago at this point, that joke started, and it just kept snowballing from there. From what I understand, it really cemented itself when the writer of the Saga Edition version of the Star Wars role-playing game, Rodney Thompson, they got him on recording at, I think it was at like a Gen Con somewhere, where it's like, oh yes, this is Rodney Thompson, lead developer of the Star Wars Saga Edition role-playing game, and I never listened to the Order 66 podcast. And and they freaked out, and then it just became a thing. And everywhere after, they always try to get like someone attached to either the game line or a celebrity or whatnot to say, I never listened to the Order 66 podcast. And it's just been the tagline ever since.
Mm-hmm. I just find it amusing, although I'm sure it's very, very confusing to the unaware.
There definitely have been people who are like, what, huh? So it's good times.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, but I thought, given, your experience specifically with Star Wars, but you've been
Mhm,
gaming for a
mhm.
long time,
Sure.
but I wanted to have a conversation about canon. That being
Okay.
canon with one N, not two N's, although two N's could come into play at some point.
Another discussion at some point. Yep.
And just around using it, ignoring it, dealing with that player or players inevitably that go, well, actually, and all that, right? Because
Sure.
I've said it before on the show, and the other Steve has said it as well for different settings. Like, I intentionally avoid, in addition to the fact that I'm just not that into high fantasy, but like the classic Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, whatever. As a GM, I don't want to compete with the lore that the diehard fans have internalized for those settings.
Sure.
For whatever reason, I do not feel the same way about Star Wars with that.
Okay.
Steve has said he does feel that way about Star Wars, less so about the D&D settings in particular.
Okay.
So, not to speak for him, and I said I can't explain to you why, because I think to say that the fan base is just as rabid for Star Wars as it is for Forgotten Realms or Dragonlance or whatever is probably accurate.
Yeah. That's a thing.
But like you've said, at least on the Order 66 podcast, you've spent most of your gaming career running games in the Star Wars universe.
Yes, absolutely.
Probably going back to the game that was the first one I ever played. I started playing with 2nd edition WEG. It was the very first game I ever played. My college roommate went, we're playing Star Wars. We need an extra person. Do you want to do this? Here, we'll give you the Wookiee. I'm like, okay, I can sit there and make bear noises.
There you go. Yep. No, the blue book, the blue cover book with Vader's head on it. That was my first copy of any Star Wars role-playing game ever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and it's funny. This has been the largest stretch where I haven't run a Star Wars game. It is clearly something that, that honestly could also be some of a motivation as far as like why we either A, haven't done an Order 66 podcast show in so long, or B, getting back to doing them on a more regular basis as a Star Wars game. But honestly, it's kind of, not to tangent too badly, but it's been sometimes hard to get games moving of late, and we don't need to go into that why. I'm sure it's been beaten to death on many episodes. But I can definitely say that my attitude about canon, and very specifically Star Wars canon, has evolved as the years have gone on. I used to be a rigid adherent to canon. I used to never want to have players intersect with the main cast of, back then we just had the three movies, and in the late 90s, and starting in the late 90s and more mid 90s rather, like any of the Timothy Zahn stuff and the extra books and novels that were starting to come out and finally starting to broaden the Star Wars universe. Less so much of trying to get intersected with those things and just trying to do my own thing within those settings, and understanding that, okay, there are these play points, but let's play in the New Republic era because that's not scripted out. I don't feel like I have to necessarily adhere to canon or anything like that. I remember that there were certain times when I would, I remember a certain campaign that I ran that was was going to be years into the future, but what eventually would be the legacy era, where some of the players were playing the descendants of the Skywalkers in the solos. But then when they actually came out with a legacy era, that particular game that I wrote that stuff for was long and gone anyway, so it really didn't matter too much. But it was kind of interesting to see where the official Lucasfilm folks took it. But yeah, as the years have gone on, I've done a lot more and with being more open to messing around with canon, not just Star Wars, but some other things too, because it's fun. As much as we might want to, George Lucas, Dave Filoni, John Favreau, they're not going to come kicking down your door and say, no, you're playing the universe wrong. You got the story wrong. You can't go messing with the stuff. It's not going to happen. So really the only things that are stopping you from, running into the Skywalkers, the Vaders, the Emperors, is just, what your table wants to do, really.
Yeah, well, and I think, just in specific with Star Wars, for me, the thing of it, the galaxy is so vast.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen with some of the stuff that's come out recently, you can have a neat little story all tied up in this little tiny corner of the galaxy that, I mean, look at, okay, for as much as it probably was no one's favorite series, Book of Boba Fett. Book of Boba Fett happens on Tatooine.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have Boba Fett, they bring in Cad Bane for the cameo.
Yeah.
You have Luke come in and whatever. Yeah, I get it. They were some of the better episodes of the series, but I have theories about that show, and we don't need to get into all that right now.
All right.
But it was a tight, concise little story in a little corner that really didn't relate much to the grander galaxy.
Right.
And there's no reason you couldn't do that in a campaign.
Dare I say, that's the majority of Star Wars campaigns. That exactly. Like this wonderful story that happens adjacent and sometimes like overlapping that Venn diagram of touching onto the main storyline and then kind of dipping back into its own thing for a while and then maybe brushing up against it again, or having these odd little intersection points. But I'd have to guess and gather, and certainly in my history, that's predominantly what a lot of gaming groups do. Is that the Book of Boba Fett idea,
Yeah, well, and I wonder though, in D&D or whatever, with, like I said, Forgotten Realms, it just feels like everyone wants to go to Waterdeep, and then you have all the characters from all the everything and Drizzt and not so much Waterdeep, but you know what I'm saying. And it feels like the only parts anyone wants to play are the parts where there's massive backlogs of canon material, and it's like, well, if I don't know what all is a GM, how do I not screw up what my players are expecting?
Right. Yeah.
And that for me is intimidating.
I mean, to give you a Waterdeep example, I'm in a game that is currently taking place in Waterdeep. I have never read the Forgotten Realms. I have read nothing of the Forgotten Realms. I've read the basics that are in, when the original Forgotten Realms core rulebook came out for 3.5, I got it and I read through it, and I'm just like, okay, cool. This is so this is where all these references come from. But I basically got the most basic abridged version mixed in with just rule stat blocks for the Forgotten Realms. I couldn't tell you a thing about any of the plot lines that have occurred or will occur or did occur in the Forgotten Realms. I might be able to remember some of the stuff that happens in the way old gold box computer games like Pool of Radiance and the Curse of the Azure Bonds, because I played those. But from what I understand, those were kind of just like their own thing, and then the novelizations of those or something else entirely different. It's like you got like that duality of, well, this is the official, but over here is what you're playing. It's your own thing, and the way it plays out is the way it plays out.
Yeah. Well, Forgotten Realms is unique too in that Forgotten Realms actually dates back to Ed Greenwood started writing in the Forgotten Realms, I believe, in the 60s.
Oh wow.
That was when he originally started writing stories and then kind of went, oh, well, these are all happening in the same, and then eventually it got bigger and bigger. He did it, and then he, sold it to TSR and,
Mhm.
you know, but yeah. And like, I guess, for me, like I said, my approach has always been, man, that stuff's cool, but I don't want to hang out with the famous people. I want to do my own thing.
Yeah, I want to make my own impact.
Yeah. And so like, but I guess, for me, it's kind of been a thing where, again, because I got into gaming late. I was I was a freshman in college when I really discovered role playing games.
Sure.
So I didn't have, I didn't start playing in middle school like a lot of people did. I didn't have the background. Like I was aware of Tolkien, but
Hmm. Hmm.
you know, and so like, I have these friends in college that are, talking about Dragonlance this and Raceland, and I'm like, well, I don't know all this stuff. And at a certain point, at that point, I was thinking more as a player. And so then I actually would intentionally avoid reading the novels or whatever because, well, if I'm playing, my character won't know this stuff, so I won't, and then it's easy for me to separate it.
Right.
But as I've gotten older and whatever, I respect that people love these things, and I catch myself doing it at times with various things. Well, no, in this, but I know a lot of people, and maybe this is more in a way something to say to people as we're being players in games is don't worry so much about what the book said. If it feels right in your story, then just frickin' roll with it.
It is absolutely your game. And like I said, I used to be a rigid adherent to canon, but after you go back to the trope of like the Marvel What If, and DC Comics came out with Elseworld, where things were different, and then even Star Wars had its own. They had this old, Dark Horse Comics did Infinities, where it basically was the what if, like what if this changed, what if that changed, what if Leia went to Dagobah and Luke didn't go, that kind of thing. There's all kinds of things that were along those lines, and it really opened up a realm of possibilities with the idea of there being a multiverse out there, and the idea that even though it's not there's no evidence in Star Wars that there's exists the thing of the multiverse. Well, the thing is that it's your game. There's nothing preventing you from assuming the roles of Luke Skywalker, of Rey, of Finn and Han and all those people, or not even being those characters, having those characters just not exist, and your PCs, your specific character is thrust into the situation of, hey, there's this droid on Tatooine who's got the plans to this Death Star, and they need to get it to the Rebel Alliance so that they can take out the Death Star. And how do you get it there? How do you stop the walkers on Hoth? How do you confront Vader and Palpatine with your burgeoning Jedi Knight? These are all valid, absolutely valid stories and absolutely valid situations. It can be fun to put into and see what you do. Or maybe that even doesn't happen. Maybe they complete the second Death Star and it starts to, the Emperor starts taking over the galaxy even more, or blows up a couple planets and it has the exact opposite effect that he thought it would. It drove more planets into open rebellion than like cowing under the heel of the Empire and being crushed in its iron grip. Maybe there's more open warfare in the galaxy because the second Death Star is out there.
Yeah.
It's fun to play with that stuff.
Oh yeah, and I guess then maybe that brings into another. We've talked a little bit about kind of those adjacent storylines, if you will, where you're touching into it, or maybe you do something where maybe you play out part of like something similar to the Rogue One story, but your players
Sure.
have to go somewhere else and steal the plans for the Death Star instead of
Sure.
Scarif, or they're involved in getting the defected pilot from Rogue One in contact with anything like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's also, and I've heard you and Phil talk about this, or not you and Phil, you and Chris, you are Phil, not Chris,
Yeah.
talk about what most people call alt U games or alternate universe, and
Yep.
I think to me the interesting way to do those, and I'd be interested, is to pick some point where this one thing happens differently and then just extrapolate on that divergence.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, like for me, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I someday would like to play with this. But what happens if Bail Organa wins the chancellorship instead of Chief Palpatine?
Mm-hmm.
How, does Palps then openly join the Separatists? But then what does he do with this clone army that he secretly built that he really needs the money of the the Republic to go collect?
Sure.
But like, I mean, but that's half the fun then is playing with that. Well, what if? And there really is no blueprint.
Yeah, you have to pick a watershed moment, and kind of it becomes an exercise on even on its own. You kind of like go down to say, okay, at what point am I starting at when the event changes, and how far am I bringing it to? Like the Bail Organa thing that you're talking about. Okay, cool. Are you playing the time of episode one? And okay, now that Child Palpatine's lost, and now that he's still just a senator, what happens on Naboo? Does he become open in his does he say like, well, screw this failed, I might as well just go open now and just be a Sith Lord? Although that really doesn't make much sense because there's 10,000 Jedi and there's just 2 Sith. Well, 2.5 depending on if you're pay attention to certain cartoons. But like, or do you take it 10 years later where the clone army's ready, and is Palpatine still a senator? Has he amassed some modicum of power? Has he continued to push the corrupt Senate to that breaking point? Is it now less of separatists versus the Republic and much more of a true Republic civil war,
Mm-hmm.
where you've got like, where the Senate is instead of a droid army, the Senate now the separatists now have a clone army.
Mm-hmm.
The Republic.
Yeah. Does the Senate bog down in further debate and gridlock because Bail is committed to discourse?
Yeah. At what point, or can Palpatine steer that into another vote of no confidence in Bail Organa's leadership?
Yeah.
Where does all that go?
Yeah. I mean, and in this case, we are talking specifically Star Wars,
Mhm.
but I think it still applies to any fandom, if you will. If you want to play, I mean, heck, there's a Terminator game out now.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm not a huge fan of the franchise. I mean, I've seen the movies, but like I couldn't tell you all the stuff that a lot of people can.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are points in that where you could go, hey, well, what if this happened and this didn't, and off we go here.
Yeah.
But I guess part of what we're talking about, and I think the trepidation a lot of people feel is, and this kind of ties into one of our Patreon supporter questions, is how do you approach canon when you're playing with either people who know a whole lot of it or people who don't know any of it?
Mm.
Because I think, at least from my perspective, if I'm playing with people that I know a whole lot of it, I know they're expecting to see certain things, and if I don't get it right, they're going to know.
Mhm.
And at the same point, from my perspective, if I'm playing with people who don't have that background, are they going to appreciate it if I do hint at it
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
use it? You know what I mean? And
Sure.
so in that case, am I putting pressure on myself as a GM to do things that my players just aren't going to notice?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. Kind of to start with, let's talk about the folks who are hip deep in canon. They know it. They know it to backwards and forwards, and they're expecting certain things, and they're expecting Easter eggs. Really, it's kind of what it is. A real good example of that is like trying to watch a Star Wars show with my fiance. She's seen the movies, and she's watched a lot of the live action stuff, and we're trying to get through Clone Wars. But that's a lot. Oh my god.
Mhm.
Trying to get through Clone Wars, trying to get through Rebels, but there are certain things where she's enjoying the story, she's enjoying it, and so going right along with it and having a good time and watching it. Meanwhile, every little Easter egg that they drop in the show, every mention of a planet, every mention of a person or a particular droid model or something, some reference that's in there, and I'm just freaking out in this corner. we're enjoying the show on two separate levels. We're both enjoying the storyline. We're both having a good time. We're both watching it. It just is that the people who are more focused on and more familiar with the canon, they appreciate the little nods and the little drops more. So as a GM, it can be helpful to satiate and satisfy those people by putting in the little comments, the little nods, the kind of like awareness of, oh man, we're here on this planet at the same time as that's going on. Oh man, and they can kind of see like, oh, okay, we can expect like maybe for some reason they have to go to Endor, and while the Death Stars are under construction, and it's before the rebels even arrive to try to take it out or infiltrate the planet. But maybe they like one of the things that I wrote as kind of a story beat for one of when Fantasy Flight Games did Allies and Adversaries and Gears and Gadgets and Starships and Speeders. I can't remember which book I wrote it for, but there was a little story hook where like you find a ship and the ship has a hidden treasure map, and the hidden treasure map takes you to this forest moon in the Endor system, and you have to go in there and sneak in down to the planet and infiltrate and find this treasure ship while the Empire is building a second Death Star in orbit, and little do the folks actually know at the time. So it's just nice that's a neat little intersection of canon, But then we got the people who are like my fiance, who have no idea what's going on in Star Wars outside of like what they've seen in the movies. They don't know. They didn't read Wikipedia and all the compilation comics, and they have no idea who Doc Afra is. They have no idea who Black Kyrgyzstan is. Any of that stuff. So, and I'm feeling that way in the Forgotten Realms game that I'm in. Like, okay, cool. I'm in Waterdeep. I know Waterdeep's got a lot of history in Forgotten Realms. Couldn't tell you a thing about it. And so something happens, and it really makes you feel like just a Joe average person in the series. Because if you're just this Joe average citizen in the galaxy, you have no idea the importance. You probably don't have any idea of the importance of kyber crystals, or you just know that the Inquisitors are bad guys, and that the Jedi were these guys who supposedly tried to do good things, but ultimately just get wiped out. So okay, you've got that plausible deniability that can sometimes make it kind of fun to discover in game, because you're both getting the surprise indoctrination while you're playing as a player and as a character. Your character has to react to, oh shoot, you mean Palpatine's evil? He's not just like a typical political tyrant. No, he's legit evil incarnate. Whoa. Oh my God, you are moving things with your mind. What the heck, man? Stuff like that. You get to see how bad the Hutt cartels are. You get to see the actual destructive social the social implications of what the Empire is actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they are legit sending the people to jail for no reason. They are sending people to prison because they looked at them wrong, or they looked at them funny.
As we've literally just seen, not to spoil anything.
Literally just saw on Andor. Just wow, they really are that bad.
Yeah.
And watching that evolve on these Star Wars shows as an outsider who doesn't know, like, who doesn't have 40 years of history under their belts and is intimately familiar with not only what could be happening, but like what has happened in the expanded universe, and trying to see those nuggets that they're bringing into the shows now.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes being the person who knows nothing about canon is a lot of fun.
Oh, I completely agree with you. It just, I think, and maybe, that's kind of the core of it, right? Is as a GM, if you've got both people, how do you balance it? Because one, and granted, you also, like I said, you have those, well, actually people who, I'm sorry, that's just not being a good player, but.
So the problem with the quote unquote problem with the well actually people is the whole, you got a couple options there. You can, first of all, you can try to tap into that.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing about the people who know a heck of a lot about the game itself, the rules lawyers. You can use them as resources and have them double check you on certain things, or more importantly, have them be the in-game, in-universe guide to the people who aren't as familiar with the canon. Give them the opportunity to flex their knowledge and as characters try to like convey to others, oh, here's what's actually going on here, and here's why that's bad or that's good or whatnot. But I think depending on the players and depending on how they handle canon, that's really going to steer your session zero and really kind of help set the boundaries of like what people's expectations are.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if some people go into a game knowing it in the expectation that, okay, this is not a canon game, be warned. You're playing a Star Wars video game. You're playing, we are in multiversal fan fiction territory. We are having fun, and there are no rules here. Anything and everything is on the table. Some people will like that, some people won't. And if they don't like it, then it's a matter of working with them. If you really want to play with them and if you really want to have them in your game, to try to figure out, okay, where's the middle ground here? Because I don't want to run a story that's just adjacent to and takes place in the same universe as the movies. I want something my own. I want something different. And I want you folks to feel like you have an impact in the galaxy and you're not just along for the ride. If you want to do that, Disney Plus is right over there. You can just watch it all,
Mm-hmm.
So canon is important for like the development of a game and the development of a storyline and then really the development of the IP itself.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to a role-playing game, canon is a great framework. It is a great idea mine, and it is a great place to start from. But I also think it's a great place to break from. I've gotten much more interested in my gaming of late of doing things that are inspired by,
Mm-hmm. And to kind of tangent a little bit here, I think that's one of the things that maybe I really appreciate about the Eberron setting for
Sure.
D&D, because now, and this is also a little different in that we're talking about a setting that was specifically developed as a role-playing game setting.
Yes.
It
Yep.
was done for hey, let's have a contest to see what setting people will do for us, and that's where it came from. But I really like the idea that to this point, and according to Mr. Baker, this is supposedly something that Wizards has also agreed to keep doing, is that they are not advancing the timeline. It's, the everything we have is from, what is it, 103
Something
or
like
what,
that.
whatever, the time that we're at. I forget what the numbers are, but
103, 106, somewhere around there.
that is the context of the world. You can do whatever you want before, after, but this is the state that the world is in right now. Here's a bunch of stuff. Go do your thing.
They will never say what happened in the Mornlands, sire. They will never reveal who the Lord of Blades is. They will never go into the demon wastes, as far as like defining stuff.
Question for you.
Yes.
Do you think there is cross inspiration between Grievous and the Lord of Blades?
You mean in the sense that one came from the other? Well,
Cross inspiration. General Grievous, Lord of Blades, pseudo mechanical, multi-armed, mythical.
I mean, it's possible.
Just curious.
I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised.
Okay. I was just curious. But that, so to speak, yes, you have canon in Eberron.
Sure.
But even, and this is another thing I love about anytime Keith Baker talks about that, it's like, well, in my Eberron, and he says that not as in, well, it's my Eberron and what I say goes. He's saying that in the context of when I run a game, this is how I do it.
Yeah.
But he's very, very open to say, look, if it's your game, do it your way. But also, and this is again, and maybe this is why, for as much as I'm not a D&D, I love the Eberron setting, right? And it's because so much of it was done with let's assume that this is a fact. What does that mean coming off of that?
Sure.
And I guess, that's kind of going to what we were talking about with the alternate universe timelines. Basically, it's the same thing. It's just that they did it with the whole world.
Yeah, legit. They changed one thing and it's something else entirely. I mean, you get kind of the same thing when you start talking about people who are very familiar with the Marvel comics and then what they did for the cinematic universe.
Mm-hmm.
The cinematic universe is definitely inspired by the comics, but there are marked changes.
Mm-hmm.
And they've come to explain that in universe as like it's a completely different. It's an alternate you. It's a metaverse. It's not a metaverse, a multiverse.
Yeah.
This actually happened in this parallel universe over here, you absolutely can do the same thing in any setting you want. Make
Mhm.
the change. Have your own Star Wars cinematic universe, although that makes less sense, but you know what I mean.
No, but I think, and you touched on it. I think to me the key point here, and you mentioned it, is being clear about how you want to approach it when you do session 0 and when you set up your game.
Talk to your players and figure out where you're going, or at the very least that they're on board for what you want to do.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
otherwise, the guy who knows all the canon is going to be fighting you the whole time.
Mhm. And then that just makes you're feeling either just annoyed or in some cases intimidated because, right, well, this guy knows so much more than I am. Like, look, I'll be honest, I had a situation in the last few years. I really wanted to play Star Wars. I was trying to convince this guy I was gaming with at the time to run Star Wars,
Mhm.
even to the point I was willing to play the 5e hack of it because I wanted to play Star Wars.
Okay.
And I could not convince him to do it. I'm like, "You'll run Curse of Strahd. You're a massive Star Wars junkie. Why won't you just run some Star Wars?"
Why wouldn't he?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
We ended up kind of drifting away from just because of play styles and,
Sure. Sure.
that kind of thing. But, yeah, well, COVID had some things to do with that group kind of breaking up too.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like I said, I don't know because of the group of us that was getting together at that time, he was far and away the most rabid Star Wars fan, and he was
Oh,
comfortable running games, so it was like,
right.
to me, it seems like a natural fit. But yeah, like you said, I think, yeah, you gotta sit down and, like for my players, I told them, "Look," I said, "I've seen the movies, I've watched most of the animated stuff, I haven't read a lot of the books." I said, "So we're going with the idea that canon is, kind of a loose guideline, a
Mm,
framework to kind of just sort of be there, and we'll use what we need. But if something doesn't quite fit, then we'll make it our own thing."
sure.
And everyone was like, okay, fine. We just want to play Star Wars."
Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. This again going to one of my patrons' question. Do you think the pressure for canon is worse from your players or on yourself?
Oh, well, that's gonna seriously depend on the person. Me with Star Wars, at times, definitely myself. At times, especially anytime before, I would say 2012, 2013, I was very hard on myself with sticking with canon. I don't think there was really anybody in my gaming group who was as big a Star Wars nut as I am. Well, with one exception. With one exception, there was another guy who was a fanatic as well, but he was much more laid back as far as it goes. And if we started to play around with play fast and loose with canon, he was a little more open to it, I think, than I would have been at the time.
Hmm.
But as things have gone on, as I got inspired by Chris and his alternate universe game, I ran my own alternate universe game. So I got more open to the idea of being okay with playing with canon, being more open to changing things around and not sticking with what the books have done or what the movies had established or what the cartoon series was locking down. So I guess it depends on the person. It really does. Because I know GMs who are like, don't give two craps about canon, but I know players who are just the same way. And likewise, I know players who were like your friend, and they're just like, no, canon is religion, canon is law. You don't mess with it.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm probably put more pressure on myself, but that's also just my personality in general.
Yeah, that's really what it boils down to. It's your personality type.
But I guess, and this was another point brought up by one of our listeners. He said, sometimes he'll just literally, they'll be playing, he'll tell one of his players to look up a Wikipedia on something and treat it as if, especially if they get a good roll on some sort of lore check.
Sure.
Okay, you found something on the HoloNet, you know? And I mean, hey, that's one way to do it. Like you said, that's in a way using your player's knowledge in
Yeah.
game. And most players probably get a bang out of that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. That was, in relation to someone who knows the rules. That's one of GM Chris's big pieces of advice is if you have someone at your table who is the rules lawyer, who knows the rules, use them. Use that resource, and you call on them a couple times for rules clarifications, not judgments, clarifications. You've got them. you've got them. They are happy to flex that muscle, and they feel that the more often than not they will feel honored, and like it'll be a massive esteem boost that they're able to do that they're able to provide this service to the table. Sometimes it goes to their heads, but for the most part, it can really be a huge boon. A huge boon if you know how to tap into that. If you can tap into that correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, well, I do that because I, through my attention span / schedule, routinely am like, I've got a good solid grasp on the framework of things, but every time I try to drill into the details, I see something shiny,
yeah.
and away I go, chasing the shiny thing.
It's really hard to keep some of them rules straight.
Well, and I've said it before, I am a spirit of the rules person as opposed to a letter of the
Sure.
rules person. It's
Sure.
just the way I like to operate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, look, if someone is a letter of the rules person, good for them. For me, that becomes much more board game than role playing game.
Legit.
And for me, that activates a different part of my brain. You know, which is where, like, I prefer playing much more theater of the mind. You put a grid and minis in front of me, and I start doing math.
Yeah.
It's just the way my brain works.
Fortunately, the narrative dice system, it's less of that because it's not, square for square. It is zones. It is like rough, like kind of medium range away, kind of short range, kind of long range. It's a lot more fluid as far as distances go, and even like medium range outside might be completely different than medium range inside. It's what the situation dictates. So there's less. It's still fairly tactical, and it's less strategic. It's less chess game where you're trying to figure out like, okay, if I move there and then move there and then move there. For me, it's much more of a visual aid, which I need because I'm a very visual person. So that's why I like to use maps and minis and stuff like that, because I want to be able to convey what I see in my head to what other people, so that we're all kind of on the same page, or at least in the same book.
So, question off of that, I'll even tie this in and make it tie back to canon. Watch this. Have you ever encountered players who, when you put a map down in front of them, view what they see on that map too much as canon, and then it stifles their creativity to go, hey, is there a whatever in the area?
Absolutely. There are several maps that I use where, and I will routinely say, this is kind of like just kind of vague as to what this is. This is a good outline. This is a good map. This gives you a general idea. Oh, well, I want to pick up one of these piles. I want to use the force and pick up one of these missiles and fly it over there because it's a starship hangar, and the artwork has like a trolley full of missiles on it, and I'm like, oh, that's not there. Like, but no, it's right there. Hey, Phil, is this control panel right here? Is that there? Or they will routinely reference the map, like, oh, cool, there's this room full of crystals. What's in these crystal rooms? Like, no, guys, there's no crystals there, but they're right here on the map. Like, guys, come on. So yeah, that is the one problem with using pre-drawn, pre-generated maps, is they're handy as hell because they're right there. But like, oh, Phil, is this actually a medical suite? No, it's not a medical suite. What is it? Storage. Well, that's lame. Shut up.
Was there medical stuff in the storage?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's when I start leaning over to like the pile of story points going, I don't know. Is it a storage filled with medical supplies?
Well, the more I get into it, the more I've come to love the narrative dice and that whole system, because it I don't know how to say it other than it makes the table work together so much more than a traditional system. You know what I mean? In the context of, not that it does anything to enforce teamwork, but that because it is so narrative, one player comes up with something and then somebody and also's off of that or is inspired. And it just, like, if you can get the players to give that first initial bit of input, they all start feeding off each other. And and like, that's my Star Wars game. I've got two people. It's their first experience with narrative dice. And I'm going, oh, geez, I'm not all that good with it, but they're having a blast. And they both gamed for years. In fact, one of them is the person who invited me to the Star Wars game all those years ago.
Right.
But, yeah, to just kind of watch them and to kind of watch them unlock it a little bit in the, "Oh, I can do that."
Mhm. Mhm.
It's so neat. And I don't how do I wanna say the other thing, and this really coming from listening to the backlog, of your podcast and you guys talking to all the devs, is how much those devs love gaming and love the Star Wars universe and all the little Easter eggs and stuff that they put into it. Like, when we talked with Jay Little, geez, a year ago,
Mhm.
the pip distribution on the Star Wars on the Force die is directly related to a Yoda quote.
Yep.
And it's like, wow, just these little things, and it's like these, and maybe that's why it doesn't, despite it being this massive game, it doesn't feel that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Totally with it.
Oh man. But anyway. Okay, well here's do you make nerd lore an in-game ability to represent their knowledge, or do you just let them be nerdy?
Uh, that's a good question. If there's anything that's really if it's not really ultra specific, it is something that could generally be known by the right people in the right places, just as common knowledge. I wouldn't make them necessarily roll for anything like that. But if it's a very specific niche chunk of information in that particular setting, I might make them make a roll for it. Like, Phil, do I know the significance of the Endor system, or do I know the significance of the Scarif system, or that kyber crystals are the crystals that are used in Jedi lightsabers? I might make them make rolls for that kind of stuff. I'm trying to think of like some other thing of that it could be. That's a good example, but if it's common enough knowledge, I just let it ride and let them say, okay, that's fine. But if it's something that's specific or could knowing that could massively change decisions as to what the PCs do, I might make them roll for it.
Fair. This just reminded me of something I did a long time ago in a game.
Oh,
And this was in my Rifts game back in college, and I know you're at least moderately familiar with Rifts.
oh no, I'm very familiar with the rest.
Okay, well, I had a character the player was playing in my game that was called the Twinkie Avenger.
All right.
The Twinkie Avenger was a crazy.
Sure.
So as we're creating this character, having just met the player at that point, turns out this guy he could create full-blown Rifts characters in 45 minutes while talking with you.
Okay.
So it gives you an idea of the processing power of this individual.
Dude, got a lot of mental bandwidth and can multitask. Okay.
So he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna make it crazy." And so we get to the table where you roll about, how they discover their powers. He gets power by association.
Okay.
So move on to the table of what do you associate your powers with?
Twinkies.
Well, he rolls asparagus dipped in vanilla yogurt.
Mm.
And we're both kind of like, well, that's
Yeah.
just weird and gross. And I look at him and I go, we could just give you Twinkies. He goes, is that really on the table? I went, yeah. He goes, okay. And he just took off, right? The character became the Twinkie Avenger, right? His neural mace was painted to look like a Twinkie on a stick. He
That's fair.
painted his fusion blocks to look like Twinkie boxes.
Okay.
He named his hover cycle FD&C yellow number 5.
Sure.
Just full on.
Deep cuts. I love it.
So just on a whim, and because, one, I didn't know any better at the time, and because this was Palladium, and it's the system that defines skill bloat, I'm like, I'm going to give you a skill. You get Twinkie lore at whatever percent.
It's fair.
Because why not?
Yeah, why not?
He actually figured out a way to use it in the game once.
That's cool. I respect that. Well done, you crazy bastard.
And that, reading that question brought that back to mind, that and this was the player putting together player knowledge with character knowledge of the thing he was trying to figure out and going, well, okay, this thing, there was a Twinkie ad in this comic book that would explain.
Oh God. Oh man. Did he reference like the one-page Batman versus Joker who steals the box of Twinkies from the cart and just...
I don't remember exactly what happened.
Oh, God.
And there may not have actually been a Twinkie ad in the thing, but it had something to do. They were trying to figure out who Loki was.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but his explanation was, well, let me make a Twinkie lore roll. And he made the roll, and he goes, well, there was a Twinkie ad in this Loki comic book that I found.
That ain't right. Oh, I love it. I
Oh,
love
that
it.
character was, and then of course, he was completely into like this pseudo superhero thing, to the awful distress of our cyber knight, who we were routinely referred to as faithful sidekick.
Mm. It sounds about right.
But oh, that character was so much fun.
Nice.
I don't remember how he died, but I do remember he did.
Spectacularly, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Because, I mean, well, he was a crazy. So,
Yeah.
in fact, that may have been the one. He may have died in the night Bubba went crazy, at which point, again, I've told the story on the podcast before, but my party self-inflicted a TPK on itself.
Mm.
And if I remember right, I know that Twinkie's player was the first character that died, whether it was Twinkie that died or if it was Zinger, his cousin, the juicer.
For those of you listening at home, I am now clutching the bridge of my nose in my hand.
Okay.
Okay.
His character dies, and he looks at the player whose insanity is what has started triggering all this mayhem and goes, okay, I'm now playing the voices in your head.
Seems fair.
Which he did while simultaneously creating
A new character.
Yes, who was Captain Marvel, except his version of Captain Marvel was the excuse for it being a player character, a useful character. He wanted to play Billy Batson.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Love it.
So,
see, I love Rift so much as a concept. So much as a concept.
Yes, that was the setting that I saw and went, so this is what a role-playing game is.
Kitchen sink.
Yeah, supposedly Robertson has publicly said he's open to a potential second edition, and Symbieta has said he might not fight him on it.
Which Robertson?
Sean Owen Robertson, the guy who did Savage Rifts.
Sure.
And has also been brought into Palladium. I don't know what his official title at Palladium is, but he is now part of the Palladium team and is kind of the heir apparent, it would seem.
Yeah.
With Kevin obviously getting up there, probably getting ready to retire.
Yeah.
Now, what you would do, because look, you clearly loved it. It's an amazing world, and there's so many of the Palladium games, but the system, and I've said before, I don't know that the system, by modern standards, it's a convoluted system.
Absolutely.
But the thing that held it back the most was its organization.
Yes.
I've said before, and you'll appreciate this, that the only person who has ever run a game of Palladium anything completely rules as written is Kevin, because he wrote it and he knows it. Everyone else is still looking for the damn reference in the books.
Yes. Or trying to figure out how does this interact with this?
Yeah. And I mean, it's a little bit of a packed up mashup of old school D&D and BRP, but
yeah, and it also comes to the point where like you go back to Heroes Unlimited, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Other Strangeness, and it kind of worked on that level. Once you threw in ninjas and super spies and they're like 50 different martial arts, you're just like, okay, is this really necessary? Even first edition, even the first like iterations of Robotech was doable. You understand the mega damage thing. All right, I can kind of get that. But just like everything of Palladium, every iteration, every book that came out afterwards had to be bigger and badder than the one previous. And after 10 books, where the hell do you go? Like when book number 5 makes everything in book number 1 obsolete. Just why?
Yeah. Well, I've said, it in some ways it is a system that defines the concept of power creep / power spiral.
Yeah, absolutely.
Skill bloat.
Didn't
what
need
are they
all
up to?
skills.
Like 4 pages of just skills in a list?
Yeah.
And again, rules is written. If you don't have the skill, you're not supposed to be able to make a check for it.
Not at all.
Well, so because I don't have carpentry, I can't swing a hammer?
Yeah.
I might be able to swing it well, but yeah. I don't know. So there's, like I said, there are rumors swirling that it might happen, although I don't know. I just bought the Savage Rifts box because it was there when I was somewhere and I went, well, okay.
I was about to say Savage Rifts is pretty much, as far as I can tell, it's basically a Rift second edition.
It effectively is. I do know that I think the storyline is advanced 3 to 5 years-ish from the Palladium books.
Yeah, yeah, of
Um, but I know everything lore-wise had to be run through Palladium before
course,
they were allowed to release it.
of course.
I don't know. Like you said, it's Savage Worlds is a game, though, for me. I really want to learn it, but I have a feeling, and maybe you could have some experience. It feels like it'd be a lot easier to learn in person than online.
Darren West, good buddy of mine, he will convert you to Savage Worlds in a heartbeat. You play one game with him. If you're able to get down to Gamer Nation Con in April, try to find whatever Savage Worlds game he is writing. Probably will be Rifts, might be Risk, might be Robotech actually, because I know that he's got Savage Worlds Robotech.
Okay.
And since the theme of it is the 80s, that would really fit. If you can get a Savage Worlds game in with Darren West, if you don't become an immediate fan, you will still gain at least a very good understanding of how the game works.
Mm-hmm.
And you can decide for yourself whether or not it's something that you're like, I can grok this, or you're just like, fun, but the system isn't for me.
I have the core book. I've read most of it.
But it's hard to grok it till you play it, right?
Well, it feels like, and again, and this is, it feels like the tagline is fast, furious, fun. It feels like it may be a little more, I don't want to say slap happy, but like a little more punchy and hyper pulpy than what I usually want to play.
I could see that.
You know, like the narrative dice system is rather unpredictable.
Can be.
But you still have a pretty heavy handle to steer it with because it's narrative. Where Savage Worlds feels like the dice can ace out and throw you all sorts of stuff that, well, now I can't do the thing I was doing.
Yeah, that's actually some of the problem that I've had with narrative dice system and some other systems I've been playing. It's like once you do narrative dice, it's really hard to go back to pass fail. It's super hard. You just kind of look at it going, that's limiting. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm playing a D&D spellcaster in my games, because if I cast a spell and the dice aren't with me, I usually at least get some result out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Fair. Yeah, well, see, like the narrative dice, though, but you know what I mean? Where it feels like as a GM, you have a little more of a set of handlebars.
Mm, mm.
You know what I mean? And because it's so narrow, yes, you're occasionally going to get those rolls that, well, okay, I guess, but you get something else.
Yeah. Yeah, you can find even through failure, you can find some way forward.
Right. Where again, just from reading it, Savage Worlds feels a little potentially, well, crap. But again, you know, narrative dice, I've said this many times, the system plays so much simpler and better than it reads. When you try and read it, you're like, what the huh? When you play it, you're like, oh, okay, this works.
Right.
You know, I'm trying to figure out how to tune it a little better, you know, and so thus I've been listening to you and Hooli and trying to read all kinds of things. But something about that intentional obfuscation of the math seems to be working a little too well.
Yeah, fair.
All right. Well, let's see. I think we've kind of touched on pretty much everything that our patrons had to ask.
Cool.
Anything more you would like to add in anything we've talked about as far as Canon or Alt U or
Just a piece of advice, not to worry too much about sticking with what is a quote unquote canon. If that's what your players want and will enjoy, and that's what you enjoy, and you want to be kind of like the other stories that are happening in the main universe, go for it. Have a good time. Understand that you are probably within the majority of what the other games are doing anyway. But if you are curious to touch on some story points that are established canon and kind of see like the Kobayashi Maru scenario of how would you handle this particular situation, don't be afraid to dive in and have a good time. I mean, like I said, Filoni, Favreau, and Lucas are not going to kick down your door and say you're playing it wrong. Have a good time.
All right. Well, I guess with that, anything you would like to plug, other than your podcast, which we've touched on, and I know you have this 404 project. I don't know what else you might have going on.
Sure.
I have a hat.
Nice. The Forge podcast did finally release the episode that Brett and I recorded with them a time ago. That goes over our Mechasys setting, where we finally got a chance to talk to that. Finally got that to go on the air, and that was a fun time. That was a nice little remember. Oh yeah, we did have that conversation. Oh cool, that got said. Oh yeah, that thing. So Forge podcast, Mechasys podcast, Mechasys discussion. That was a good time. It also kind of got me with some because we've been working on another project. Actually, no, we talked about it, so we can. Anarchy in Dragon City, which is our homage to the cyberpunk Shadowrun type settings and adventures, and greatly inspired by with our own unique twists upon them. We've been working on that a lot. We are hoping to get that out the door shortly. Shortly could be by the end of the year. Shortly could be by Gamer Nation Con. Shortly could be later. But it's really at the point where we're just kind of like trying to smooth everything out. We're finishing up some playtesting and basically just trying to get everything written pretty and laid out.
Yeah, Brett actually came and ran the adventure he ran at Gamer Nation Con last year for Steve and I and a few of our listeners. We had a blast with that.
He and Kimber did a fun job writing up that setting. We've been having some blast with it. The whole like Shadowrun and heist and things. That's fun.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a great way to just kind of describe it. It's like Shadowrun meets Blades in the Dark. So that's a pretty good way to describe it. In the sense that Blades in the Dark is very heist oriented. It's also very, if you're playing it straight in the kind of Blades in the Dark setting, they're in a city. They really can't go anywhere outside the city for various reasons. And the Anarchy in Dragon City setting is very similar in that regard. You're in this city, this corporate dystopia run by, in this particular instance, a dragon. And outside the walls that the dragon is maintaining is wild space. And all kinds of monsters and other scary shit is out there. Sorry if I swore. But yeah, no, that's kind of it.
Okay. Yeah, no, that it also feels grittier than especially Shadow the Beanstalk, which I think is a really cool kind of post-cyberpunk sci-fi setting, but it doesn't have the grit that I want in cyberpunk.
I could see that.
At least not on the surface. It might be there, but
I think it's able to be there. It really depends on your GM and your group's play style.
I also came to cyberpunk via 2020.
I'll tell Storian, baby.
I will say that book, for its era, it just so well, like everything in that book just oozes the attitude that they want you to have.
It did.
In that setting.
It really did.
And I will say, for a game system designed in the late 80s, I think it was miles ahead of most other designs that were its peers.
Hands down. Mike Pondsmith was an amazing game designer. Did some amazing things. He really innovated a few things that have definitely trickled down over the years. And I wish he had gotten his Mechton Zeta relaunch to go. I know they kickstarted it, and I know it just fell apart. And hopefully they're able to pick it up and redo it, because I loved that game. It was a direct inspiration for Mechasys, and the world that went along with the core, the Algol system, and that was a great setting idea. I loved it. So I hope someday he gets back to it and he's able to finish it off. So
yeah, well, I mean, look, you're talking about the trickle down. I mean, the skill system from that game is pretty obvious if you look at that and then look at, say, 3.5 or 5e D&D, that they went, yes.
That's
he may have been inspired by something before that, but yeah. All right. So all that being done, shall we play Game of the Week?
Sure.
Game of the Week. Game of the Week.
All right. Would you like to go first, or do you want me to go first?
No, I can go first. My game of the week is the Transformers role-playing game.
Ah.
I have started up a Westmarch style Transformers game with a bunch of my friends, where I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with the Westmarch theme, but in case you're not, it's generally speaking the idea of the game master's like, I'm going to run a game on this day. Who can show up? If you show up, cool, you can play. It really somewhat forces the GM to run stories in like the session. It doesn't allow, although, it can, but it doesn't typically allow too much of like long running arcs as far as like one game cliffhangers into another, at least in the sense of like mid story. Some of the themes from the story might be able to cliffhang, but you show up and it's almost like a con mod. You get 4 to 5 hours of good solid game, a start, a middle, and an end. And the Transformers setting uses this new Essence 20 system by Renegade Studios, where you are rolling a D20 and another die from D2 all the way up to D12, or even higher if you like get up shifts, because there are things that you can do to like increase the die you're rolling. But it's neat. It's an interesting system. It is a pass-fail system when it boils down to it, and sometimes it just kind of leaves a little bit lacking. It's a very interesting advancement system too. You're somewhat rigidly structured in like, okay, level 2, this gets up, and you can raise this one of these skills. Level 3, this attribute goes up, and you can raise one of these skills. It's somewhat restrained as far as what your skills get better in. So as I look at it, it's fairly D&D like in that regard. I mean, it's not like your combat ability is going to go up every few levels. It just does. You can't, not like a freeform system like narrative dice where you could like, oh man, I really need to get up my ranged heavy, so I'm going to dump a bunch of my next XP into doing that. You might not be able to raise up the equivalent skill for 2 levels in Transformers, but it is a fun game. It is a fun system. It's neat to be able to roll around as Autobots and fighting, trying to figure out like what nefarious plot the Decepticons are up to this week and trying to stop them. And it is definitely a system where you want to talk about like what is canon. That is not like a philosophical question in Transformers. That is more like a literal, okay, what's canon? Because you got the G1 cartoon, you've got Beast Wars, you've got Transformers Animated, Transformers Prime, Transformers Energon, the Bay films, Bumblebee. You're like, what the hell is actually canon? And it's it really kind of in the core setting is very G1-ish, Generation 1-ish, with some tweaks and some additions from other settings. Mostly stuff like Bumblebee he's not a VW Bug. It's more of the sports car Camaro is kind of like the evergreen Bumblebee at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm having fun with the idea of like the players right now are basically a lost Autobot colony on a different planet. And there's a space bridge there, and there's some NPCs who are trying to reactivate the space bridge. It's a general understanding that eventually the game will get to Earth in the not so distant future. But when the players do get there, they will definitely, the players, not the characters, the players will definitely be like, oh, Phil's going this way with it. Oh no. Oh dear. Because they're not playing. They're like none of the named Autobots are there. So one big thing is like, what happened to Optimus Prime? What happened to the Decepticon Vanguard that went after him? What happened to them? Where are they? Where are they? And they'll get to Earth and they're like, oh no. But that's my game of the week. I do recommend it. It's a lot of fun. I and my players are enjoying it, and it is absolutely giving me inspirations for the Transformers angle of Mechasys that I am going to be running at Gamer Nation Con in April. Good time.
Well, on that note, just to tangent a little bit for you to get to my game of the week. As of right now, it looks like Steve and I are going to try and make it down to Gamer Nation Con.
Fantastic.
Plans are in the works. Let's put it that way. We're still figuring out details. And for those who are listening, by the time this goes live, we may get the official announcement, but
we should, according to Chris, the Kickstarter should go live literally any day now.
Yes. So by the time anyone actually hears this, you may need to go to Kickstarter and search it. Quickly. Tentatively scheduled for tax weekend in April, like the 11th through the 15th or something like that, I think.
That sounds about right.
Dallas, Texas.
Can't do it the week before because the week before is Easter weekend, so they can't do it that weekend. And they always try to do it the first. Gamer Nation Con is always the first full weekend in April that isn't Easter.
Aha.
So, like, if the Thursday is March 31st, it's not going to be that weekend. If it's April 1st, it will be that weekend, as long as that's on a weekend that has Easter in it. So
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes. Just wish that Texas was closer to Pennsylvania.
No, I hear that. I hear that.
Well, you're even farther. So
It used to be one of the first few weekends in March, but then they realized that like what was happening was like I think it was the first or second one, a significant portion of the player base could not arrive due to snowfall. It wasn't a huge amount, but there was definitely like two handfuls of people who were like, it's 12 inches of snow here and our flight got canceled.
yeah.
And they either showed up late or they couldn't show up at all. So they're like, let's move it a little bit later. And it seems to have worked.
Let me sidetrack here, go back to my game of the week, and then we'll talk a little bit about Gamer Nation Con before we wrap up.
Shoot.
All right. So my game of the week is a game, and I just found this. It's all of $5 on drive-through.
Okay.
It's a game called The Silver Road.
Okay.
It is, and here I'll link it for you in the green room. Here, hang on.
All right.
Okay. So it is an experimental minimalist storytelling game for 3 to 5 players, written by John Hodgson, who's worked on The One Ring, Adventures in Middle-earth, Beowulf, and the Terminator RPG, among other things. Illustrations by Mike Francina, I think is probably how that's pronounced.
That looks right.
Who's worked for Blizzard, worked on Magic the Gathering. Little 24-page book, says a lot of AI art. By the way, the pages that they show in the drive-thru listing look absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, they do.
But it's saying to play this, you need a pencil and paper. I'm guessing you get away with a pen, all of 1d6 and the book.
Huh.
And it's
That's
really
right.
just, it says bring your own setting, although example adventure and 2 example characters are included.
Mm-hmm.
It just, I mean, I don't know. It just, the images looks like something I want to fiddle around with. And for $5,
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm guessing this Hodgson guy, based on those titles, probably has a Cubicle 7 connection.
Uh-huh.
Because I know the guy who did Beowulf used to be, I think, the art director for Cubicle 7.
Sure.
But yeah, it like I said, there aren't a lot of details on it, but the images make me, because they're like kind of decrepit, Middle Earth, foggy, but not like overly dark. Just sort of that dreary, slightly spooky, but not over the top dark.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. I don't know why. All right, so that was my game of the week, but let's go back to Gamer Nation Con a little bit, because I just wouldn't have been listening to in the last week or two you talking about your experience at Gamer Nation Con 2, as I don't listen to old Order 66 episodes.
Right.
Now, I have only been to one convention thus far.
Okay.
Which was, we have the local group called Pittsburgh Retro Gaming puts on what they call the Pittsburgh Gaming Expo.
Okay.
Which they did. They got about half of a local convention center, and as a group, they're a little more into retro video games than tabletop games, but they also like tabletop games.
Okay.
So we had a tabletop section. A local game store brought their board game library that they have in store, which I posted pictures of it on a couple of Discords. It's pretty healthy considering it's one game shop, and that's what I found out later. I knew it was what he had in the store. I didn't realize if you go to the store, you can just take the game to a table and play it.
Yes.
Not quite to the extent of what I saw in the video Chris posted for Dallas Games Marathon, but I would say a third to half of that.
Good.
Which is pretty impressive, like I said, for primarily one local game store going, here, I'll bring my stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There were probably 20 feet of shelf space, all filled up with board games, maybe more than that, maybe 30, I don't know.
All right.
But there was that, a bunch of tables, lots of tabletop stuff going on. Panels, had a huge room full of old retro arcade cabinets, pinball, consoles, everything from literally, like there was an actual Tron cabinet there. There was a lot of really cool stuff. There was a couple of real old pinball machines, and all the cabinets and the pinballs set up free to play.
Nice.
They had, like I said, rows of tables of vintage console stuff. Vendors selling a lot of Nintendo, Super NES, PlayStation, all the old whatever. There were people there from the 501st Legion. There was and I don't know the name of them, but there was a Star Trek cosplay group there that had their bridge set up.
Nice.
There was a Halo cosplay group there. They had some cosplay panels.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit of everything, right? It was really fun,
sure.
kind of small. About, I think, total take door for 2 days, I think they said was about 2,300,
Oh, nice.
which is not huge, but not
Hmm.
small.
Hmm.
So because I do know that Gamer Nation Con happens in what is effectively a retail storefront, or used to be.
Sort of. The retail aspect of Dallas Games Marathon was kind of minimal.
Mm-hmm.
Take your average. Actually, how do I describe this? If you've ever walked by one of those one of those strip malls that has had either like a dance studio or a small like workout, kind of personal trainer workout type place, that's about the size of Dallas Games Marathon. I don't exactly know the square footage, but it's not like one of those small stores that you kind of go in and it is much longer than it is wide. This one's kind of like a square. So maybe like 2 or 3 of those typical mall store shops side by side. The retail portion of Dallas Games Marathon took up the front right corner of it. So like half a wall and then like round the corner and maybe a little bit that way. Their big draw was providing gaming space and a massive library of games. And you paid basically a monthly subscription fee or monthly membership fee to be able to go in there at any time, at any hour up to like closing, which I think was like midnight, and use their games, play their games, use their game space. They'll run Magic tournaments there. They'll run, back in the day, they ran various other like miniature war game tournaments. I'm sure they still do some like Warhammer stuff and, all that kind of stuff. So the retail is just sort of there as like a kind of a side hustle of like, oh yeah, we can offer this stuff too. But it never was their big thing. They never had like a huge catalog of games to buy. They had some niche ones and they had some like good ones that they knew would continually sell, or stuff that they were trying out. But their big draw was their membership fees, and their memberships. Obviously, that kind of format doesn't survive a pandemic where everyone needs to be isolated for practically an entire year. So they closed down, and the idea is that they would not be back. So that's why Chris and Dave and Krista had to go try to find a new venue, and they did. They found this small convention center that was new in the Plano area, I believe. I was there for all of 4 hours this past year through an accident of scheduling, but it was great. It was wonderful, but it wiped them out because it was a convention center, and even a small convention center can wipe out a budget. So that's why they're going to have to go back to a Kickstarter, because they used to do a Kickstarter to get the original Gamer Nation cons up and running. And then they finally had money in the bank, and that they were able to fund, like, okay, we don't have to do this anymore. We can actually like just do it, and people can pay at the door or leading up to it, and it's all well and fine. But now, because of that 1 year, they were wiped out. So like, okay, now we have to go back to kickstarting it for probably, I imagine, the next few years while they rebuild up their equity, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It is a wonderful con. I cannot sing it enough praises. I have been to the Holy Land of Gen Con. I have been to PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia. I have been to Origins Game Expo in Columbus, Ohio, and I have had more fun and more fulfilling gaming at the time 150 person Gamer Nation Con in Texas than I did at any of those other conventions. I had fun at those conventions, I did, but my gaming experience was a lot more enjoyable in Dallas, because they really do a really good job of making you feel like it's you gaming with 150 of your best friends. It is a wonderful community. And with the new Dallas Games Marathon space, they are actually able to increase the number of attendees by 50 people, which is something I always felt that they needed to be able to do anyway. Can't have a con and a community grow if you don't have any place to grow. So hopefully people will be able to I know that I've got a small contingent of folks from my neck of the woods that we're all like, oh no, we're going, we're absolutely going. And we're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think just because of the way things work out, Steve and I may be driving.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably just gonna rent something and drive it, because the more I thought about it, if I rent something and it breaks down, it's someone else's problem.
True. True.
But it's right, we're in that sweet spot where if I pay to rent a vehicle and I pay for fuel, it's about the same price as a plane ticket if 2 of us do that. And part of me says a road trip seems like fun.
Okay. All right. I will give you that. I will give you that.
You know, like, the cost is about the same, then I don't have to trust my beloved books to an airplane and baggage handlers. But I'm also driving, what, 8, 9 hours closer to Texas than you are.
True. Yes. Yes. You're on the other side of Philadelphia. I mean, sorry, you're the other side of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Um, I know I have many friends who do the drive from Boston region down to Pittsburgh region for the SCA for Penzic. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's like a 10, 12, 14-hour drive, depending on how you go and how the traffic is at the time. So the thought of driving to Texas from here is like, oh, just put me on a plane. The time to money coefficient is more worth it for me to get on a damn plane.
Well, see, I happen to, I live completely across the city from where the airport is.
Yeah, sure.
So it takes me an hour at least to get to the airport.
Ugh, gross.
I checked in flights. Now there's a smaller regional airport that does have flights to Dallas that's 30 minutes the other direction.
Okay.
However, flights from there to Dallas cost approximately $300 more.
Ugh. Damn it.
So, yeah, but I'm kind of hoping to rustle up enough interest in the greater gamer nation to, like, well, let's make a caravan,
Sure.
and pick up people along the way. Because, like, from looking at Google Maps, like, we go through, like, Cincinnati on down through, and so it's like, but depending on how we could swing through Columbus and then down. I'd have to look at the maps, but
Yeah.
I think that would be fun, like a little caravan, and all just pull in and
We're here.
show up midnight, like, it's like 18 hours.
Yeah, that's no fun. That's no fun.
But so yeah, Gamer Nation Con sounds like a hell of a good time.
It'll be great.
Yep, like I said, by the time anyone actually hears this, the Kickstarter may well be actively online.
Possibly over. Who knows?
Well, I doubt you'd run it that short, because we're recording like a week and a half ahead of when this will air.
Oh yeah, no. I think he said it was be like at least a 3-week, possibly a 4-week Kickstarter. So
Yeah, I'll link it in the show notes if it is live at the time of me uploading,
sure.
or if I got a preview address. But with that, I think I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Check out the Order 66 podcast. There's lots and lots of great old stuff to go back and check out. Check out the stuff from Studio 404. I already own most of it.
Thank you.
Check us out. We've got the Discord server. You can find us on Facebook. Find us Discord, Facebook. There's a Twitter account that I usually only post episode releases because I'm a very bad Twitterer. We have the Patreon if you'd like to help us out a little bit. I think that's most of the stuff. So
good.
with that, I think just remind everyone to be kind to each other and get out there and play some RPGs.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
All right, let me hit you with this other question we got.
Okay, cool.
And I think, okay, where is it? Let me find it here. Because he wrote up this big thing. Where did he put it? Or did he delete it?
Did he delete it? If he deleted it, it's going to be a really quick segment.
Yeah, well, no, because there was something about your Canon, and it was a question about either that or I just imagined it. It was something about what to do when the cannon of a certain gun cannon conflicts with your head cannon, and how do you how do you resolve your head cannon with the cannon about the cannon? But I can't find where he posted it.
I'm gonna need a diagram for that question.
But